My mother did not whisper it like a warning. She said it like a rule of gravity. Don't embarrass us, as if I were the stain in the family portrait, not the secret they had been painting over for years. I would have stayed invisible if the bride's father had not lifted his glass, scanned the crowd, and asked the one question that turned the entire estate silent. My name is Zoe Cooper, and as I stepped out of the rented sedan onto the crushed white gravel of the Harrow estate, I felt less like a guest and more like a smudge on a camera lens that someone had forgotten to wipe away. The air in Watch Hill, Rhode Island, tasted different from the air anywhere else I had ever been. It did not smell like salt or seaweed. It smelled like cold cash and exclusionary zoning laws. The ocean crashed somewhere below the cliffs, a rhythmic, expensive sound that seemed to be keeping time with the string quartet playing softly on the upper terrace. The mansion itself was a sprawling architectural statement that shouted power in a whisper. It was all gray stone, slate roofing, and windows that reflected the Atlantic Ocean back at itself. As if the house owned the water, too. Valets in white jackets were jogging back and forth, whisking away Rovers and Bentleys with the efficiency of pit crews. I stood there for a moment, smoothing the fabric of my dress, which I had bought off the rack at a department store 3 days ago. It was navy blue, sensible, and completely invisible, which was exactly the point. My parents were already there. They had arrived early. Of course, to be late was to be noticed for the wrong reasons, and my family's entire existence was curated to avoid the wrong kind of notice. I saw them standing near the entrance, flanking my brother, Dylan Mercer. The visual hierarchy was immediate and brutal. They were the sun and the moon, and Dylan was the earth they orbited. I was just some stray debris floating out in the cold vacuum of space. My mother, Eleanor, was picking a microscopic piece of lint off Dylan's lapel. Her hands were fluttering over him with a nervous, possessive energy. She adjusted his silk tie, smoothed the shoulder of his bespoke jacket, and stepped back to admire him. Dylan stood there letting it happen, wearing that easy practice smile that had gotten him out of failing grades in high school and into rooms like this in adulthood. He looked the part. I had to give him that. With his sandy hair perfectly coiffed and his jawline sharp enough to cut glass, he looked like he had been born on a yacht. I walked up to them, my heels clicking softly on the stone. My father, Robert, saw me first. His eyes flickered over me, assessing, checking for damage, before he gave a stiff nod. He did not smile. He looked relieved that I was wearing blue and not something loud. "Zoe," he said. It sounded less like a greeting and more like an attendance check. "Hi, Dad, Mom, Dylan." Dylan grinned and gave me a half hug, careful not to wrinkle his suit. "Hey, Z, glad you made it." He smelled of expensive cologne and fear. It was a faint scent, buried under the sandalwood and citrus. But I had known my brother for 28 years. I knew when he was terrified. My mother did not hug me. She closed the distance between us, her eyes scanning my face, my hair, my dress. She was looking for a flaw. When she could not find a glaring one, she settled for the general disappointment of my presence. She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a register that was audible only to me. "Don't embarrass us tonight," she said. It was not a request. It was a command. It was the same tone she used to tell me to stand up straight or to fix my teeth, but she was not done. She gripped my forearm, her manicured nails digging in just enough to register as a warning. "We are close, Zoe. Dylan is very close to sealing this. Do not make this about you. No speeches. We do not need you trying to be funny or sentimental. And for the love of God, no research talk. Nobody here wants to hear about amputees or plastic limbs while they are eating canapes. It is grotesque." I felt the familiar burn in my chest, the one I had been nursing since I was 16. It is biomedical engineering. Mom, it is not grotesque. It is pediatric prosthetics. It is depressing, she hissed, cutting me off. And it bores people. Graham Harrow is a businessman, not a doctor. Just smile, nod, and drink your champagne. And please, do not mention that you are not married. If anyone asks, you are seeing someone who is busy. Do not look pathetic." "I am not pathetic," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I have a doctorate. I run a lab." "You work for a non-profit," my father interrupted, stepping in to reinforce the wall. "You make toys for sick children, Zoe." "It is charitable, fine, but tonight is about Dylan. This is his night. This is his future. Just blend in. Blend in." That was the Cooper family motto for their daughter. "Stand still. Stay quiet. And try not to remind anyone that you exist." I looked at Dylan, waiting for him to defend me, waiting for him to say, "Actually, Zoe is the director of the Stonebridge Biodesign Center, and she just secured a major grant for low-cost mobility aids." But Dylan just checked his watch and adjusted his cuffs. He was not going to save me. He needed this marriage to Lila Harrow more than he needed a sister. "Okay," I said, exhaling the word like smoke. "I will be invisible." "Good," my mother said, releasing my arm. She smoothed her own dress, a shimmering silver gown that cost more than my first car. "Go find your seat. We need to do a lap with Dylan before the Harrows come down." They turned their backs on me in unison, a three-headed hydra of ambition, and walked toward the main terrace. I was left standing alone in the entryway, holding my purse like a shield. I made my way through the house. It was magnificent, in that cold, museum-quality way. The ceilings were 20 feet high, hung with crystal chandeliers that shattered the light into 1,000 rainbows. The guests were beginning to fill the space, a sea of black tuxedos and designer gowns. I recognized faces from the society pages and business journals: senators, hedge fund managers, tech moguls. This was not just a wedding engagement party, it was a merger of empires. I found the seating chart on an easel near the terrace doors. I scanned the names, my finger tracing down the calligraphy. The head table was front and center, reserved for the Harrow family and the Mercer family. Friends of the couple were in the middle tier. Business associates were on the perimeter. I kept looking. I finally found my name, Dr. Zoe Cooper. It was at table 19. I looked up at the terrace layout. Table 19 was not just in the back. It was practically in another zip code. It was tucked into the far corner of the lower terrace, partially obscured by a massive decorative urn overflowing with white hydrangeas and behind a structural pillar. It was the kind of seat you gave to the embarrassing cousin or the unexpected +1. I walked over to it. The table was set for 8, but it was currently empty. From my chair, I had a great view of the stone pillar and the back of a waiter's station. If I craned my neck, I could see the ocean. I could not see the head table at all. This was not an accident. My mother had helped plan the seating. I knew her handwriting on the draft charts. She had put me here. She had physically marginalized me to ensure that I could not accidentally wander into a conversation that mattered. I sat down, placing my clutch on the table. A waiter appeared instantly, offering me a glass of champagne. I took it, not because I wanted to drink, but because I needed something to do with my hands. From my vantage point or lack thereof, I watched the theater of the evening unfold. I could see the main crowd through the gaps in the floral arrangements. Dylan was in his element. He was moving through the clusters of guests with the grace of a figure skater. I watched him laugh at a joke I knew he did not get. I watched him shake hands with a firm, two-pump grip that screamed sincerity. He was charming, handsome, and completely hollow. I saw a man in a gray suit ask him something, gesturing with a cigar. Dylan nodded seriously, made a vague hand motion that encompassed the horizon, and patted the man on the shoulder before pivoting away. I knew that move. That was the, "I have no idea what you just asked me, but I'm going to make you feel like we agree" maneuver. He was avoiding any real questions about his career. To the Harrows. Dylan was an investment consultant with a boutique firm. In reality, Dylan had bounced between 3 startups in 4 years, none of which had survived his tenure, and was currently consulting for our father's struggling logistics company while looking for a golden parachute. Lila Harrow was that parachute. Speaking of Lila, I spotted her near the string quartet. She was breathtaking, but not in the way my brother was. She did not look manicured. She looked radiant. She was wearing a simple white silk dress that moved like water. What struck me was not her beauty, but her posture. She was leaning in to listen to an elderly woman in a wheelchair, holding the woman's hand in both of hers. She was not scanning the room for better options. She was present. A moment later, a server dropped a tray of empty flutes near her feet. The crash silenced the immediate area. Before the server could even turn red, Lila was on her knees, helping him pick up the shards. She was laughing, saying something that made the terrified server smile. She was genuine. She was warm. She was completely unaware that she was marrying a man who saw her as a line of credit. My stomach twisted. I liked her. That made this whole charade infinitely worse. Then, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It was a subtle physical change, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. The conversations quieted. Spines straightened. I saw heads turn toward the French doors. Graham Harrow had entered the terrace. The bride's father was a man who did not need to shout to be heard. He was in his 60s, with silver hair and a build that suggested he chopped his own wood on weekends despite owning half the eastern seaboard. He moved through the crowd with a calm, terrifying authority. People did not just move out of his way. They parted like the Red Sea. He stopped to shake a hand here, nodded a guest there. He was the gravity that held this entire world together. I shrank back in my seat, suddenly grateful for the hydrangeas. A man like Graham Harrow had no business with a woman like me. I was a biomedical engineer who spent her days in a basement lab trying to figure out how to make a prosthetic knee joint cost less than $50. I was not part of this ecosystem of high finance and old blood. I took a sip of champagne and watched my parents. They had maneuvered themselves into Graham's path. But not aggressively. They were hovering, waiting for the perfect moment to be acknowledged. I saw them pause near a large glass pane that acted as a windbreak for the terrace. They thought no one was watching. I saw my mother check her teeth in the reflection. Then, she turned to my father. She said something, and he adjusted his smile. He widened it, crinkling his eyes to look more approachable, less desperate. My mother nodded, critiquing the performance. They adjusted their posture, squaring their shoulders, lifting their chins. It was chilling. They were not two parents happy for their son. They were actors rehearsing a role called We Belong Here. They were terrified that at any moment, someone would tap them on the shoulder and ask to see their ticket. I looked down at my hands. They were rough from lab work, the nails short and unpolished. I thought about the email I had received yesterday from my team at Stonebridge. We had finally cracked the tensile strength issue on the pediatric ankle joint. It was a breakthrough that would help thousands of kids in developing nations walk to school. It was the proudest moment of my career. Don't embarrass us. My mother had said, no research talk. To them, my work was a parlor trick that did not work at parties. To them, I was just the daughter who did not marry money, the one who worked too hard for too little, the one who had to be hidden behind a potted plant so she would not ruin the aesthetic. I sat there in the shadows of Table 19, listening to the laughter of people who had never worried about the cost of an MRI, and I felt a heavy, cold stone settle in my gut. I took another sip of champagne. It tasted bitter. I checked the time. It was only 6 p.m. The night had barely begun, and I was already exhausted. I leaned back, resigning myself to 5 hours of silence. I would stay in my corner. I would keep my mouth shut. I would be the invisible Cooper. But as I watched Graham Harrow move closer to where my parents were posing, I had a strange, sinking feeling that the invisibility I had been promised was about to be revoked. My parents were smiling at the reflection of the life they wanted. But they had forgotten that glass is transparent, and eventually, everyone sees what is standing behind it. From my vantage point behind the hydrangeas, I became an unwilling anthropologist of my own family. I watched my parents work the room with a desperation that was almost impressive in its sheer, sweaty tenacity. They were not just mingling, they were hunting. My mother had cornered a woman I recognized from the society pages as a trustee of the local art museum. I could not hear every word, but I could read the body language. My mother was leaning in too close, her hand resting with feigned intimacy on the woman's forearm. She was doing that thing where she laughs a little too loudly at a comment that was not actually a joke, tilting her head back to expose her throat like a bird courting a mate. "Oh, absolutely." I heard her voice drift over the low hum of the string quartet. "Dylan has always been so passionate about the arts. We were just saying that once he and Lila are settled, he is looking to join a board. He needs a creative outlet away from high finance." I nearly choked on my champagne. The only creative outlet Dylan had ever expressed interest in was finding new ways to expense dinners to his company card, and high finance. My brother was currently working out of a shared WeWork space, trying to launch an app that dropped pins on clean public restrooms, but here, in the golden light of the Harrow estate, facts were malleable. My parents were trading Dylan's engagement like a futures contract, leveraging his proximity to the Harrow fortune to secure their own invitations to galas and board meetings. It was a masterclass in transactional relationships. They were selling access to a son they did not really know, to people they did not really like, for a status they could not really afford. I looked away, feeling a sudden wave of exhaustion. I picked up my phone, tempted to check my lab emails, but then I remembered my mother's command. "No research talk. Do not look pathetic." I set the phone down. Is this seat taken? Or is it reserved for the ghosts of ancestors past? I looked up. Standing next to my table was a woman who looked like she had been carved out of expensive marble. She was older, perhaps in her early 70s, with a bob of steel-gray hair cut so sharply it could probably slice fruit. She wore a black tuxedo suit that made every ball gown in the room look frivolous. She was holding a martini glass with a single olive, and she was looking at me with an expression of amused curiosity. "It is open," I said, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. "Although I should warn you, the view is mostly shrubbery and the back of a waiter." She laughed, a low, dry sound. "Perfect. I have been trying to escape a conversation about polo ponies for 20 minutes. I hate horses. They are beautiful, but they bite." She sat down, crossing her legs with an elegance that made me sit up straighter. "I am Evelyn Klein." The name hit me like a physical tap on the forehead. Evelyn Klein. She was not just a guest. She was a legend in the medical tech world. She sat on the board of 3 major hospital networks and had funded half the biotech startups in Boston in the 90s. "I know who you are," I said, before I could stop myself. Then I flinched, remembering my orders to be invisible. "I mean, nice to meet you. I am Zoe." "I know who you are too, Dr. Cooper," she said calmly, taking a sip of her martini. I froze. My hand tightened around the stem of my glass. "You do?" "Stonebridge Biodesign," she said, ticking the name off like an item on a grocery list. "The Pediatric Low-Cost Initiative. You published a paper 6 months ago on the use of recycled thermoplastics in variable load joints. I read it. The section on stress distribution was brilliant, a bit dry in the methodology, but brilliant." My heart did a double beat. Someone here knew my work. Someone here had actually read the methodology section. "You read the paper. That journal has a circulation of about 500 people. Graham Harrow gave it to me," she said. The world tilted slightly on its axis. "Excuse me, Graham Harrow. The man whose daughter is marrying my brother." Evelyn smiled, and this time there was a glint of mischief in her eyes. Graham is a voracious reader of anything related to mechanical engineering. He started his career in manufacturing, before the hedge funds and the real estate. He loves the nuts and bolts of things. He has been following your work for 3 years. "Zoe, 3 years." I stared at her, trying to process this. "That is impossible. My work is small scale. We are barely funded." "Which is why he tried to contact you," Evelyn said. She set her glass down and leaned forward slightly. "About 2 years ago, he sent an inquiry through a university liaison. He wanted to discuss funding a pilot program for your variable load knee. He never heard back." My mind raced backward, tearing through the mental filing cabinet of my memory. 2 years ago, I was drowning in grant applications and teaching undergraduate labs. I remembered an email. It had come from something generic, like the Harrow Group. The subject line had been inquiry regarding patent collaboration. I felt the blood drain from my face. Oh my God. You remember it? I deleted it, I whispered, horrified. I thought it was a corporate buyout attempt. We get these sharks sometimes who want to buy the patent rights and shelf the technology so it does not compete with their high-end models. I did not even open it. I just saw group and patent and hit delete. Evelyn threw her head back and laughed. It was a genuine, delightful sound that drew a few stares from the nearby tables. You deleted Graham Harrow. Oh, that is rich. He thought you were playing hard to get. He actually respected you more for it. He told me. That woman does not care about the money. She only cares about the work. I sat there, stunned. My parents had spent the last 5 years groveling for a scrap of attention from people like the Harrows. They had curated every inch of their lives to appear worthy of this circle. And I, the family disappointment, had casually thrown a multimillionaire's offer into my digital trash bin because I was too busy actually doing the work my parents despised. He wants to meet you tonight, you know, Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He saw your name on the guest list well. He had to ask for the full list because your parents only listed you as guest initially, and he lit up. He is bored to tears by these finance types. He wants to talk about thermoplastics. My mother told me not to speak, I said, the irony tasting like ash in my mouth. She specifically said no research talk. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. She looked over my shoulder, and her expression hardened. Well, speak of the devil. I turned. My parents were drifting toward us. They had clearly spotted me talking to Evelyn Klein, and had decided that I was currently ruining their social standing. They moved with that synchronized, predatory grace, smiles plastered on, eyes darting around to see who was watching. Mrs. Klein, my mother exclaimed, her voice pitching up an octave. She ignored me completely, positioning herself so her back was partially blocking my view of the party. I am so sorry if our Zoe is bothering you. She can be quite passionate about her little projects. I hope she has not been boring you with technical details. On the contrary, Evelyn said, her voice cool and sharp. We were having a fascinating discussion about structural engineering. Your daughter is remarkably articulate. My father stepped in, placing a hand on my mother's shoulder, smiling tight. You are too kind, Evelyn. Zoe is very dedicated to her charity work, but please, do not feel obligated to entertain her. We know how valuable your time is. Charity work, Evelyn repeated, the words rolling around her mouth like a bad taste. I believe she runs a biomedical research facility. Robert, that is hardly a soup kitchen. My father stiffened. It was a microscopic reaction, a tightening of the jaw, a flare of the nostrils. He had been corrected by someone he needed to impress. Regarding a daughter he was trying to hide, he did not know how to process it. Of course, he stammered. Biomedical. Yes, we are very proud. You should be, Evelyn said. She stood up, smoothing her tuxedo jacket. I see Graham signaling me. Zoe, do not go anywhere. We are not finished. She gave me a wink that my parents could not see. And then she walked away, leaving a vacuum of silence in her wake. My mother turned on me the second Evelyn was out of earshot. Her face was a mask of fury. What did you say to her? She hissed. I told you to blend in. Evelyn Klein is one of the most influential women in New England. You do not just chat with her. She sat with me. Mom, I said, keeping my voice low. She wanted to talk about my work. Your work. My mother laughed. A short, cruel sound. Nobody wants to talk about your work. Zoe, she was being polite. God, you are so socially inept. She was probably looking for an excuse to leave. And you just kept babbling. She said Graham Harrow reads my papers, I said quietly. My father scoffed. Do not be ridiculous. Graham Harrow runs an empire. He does not read obscure medical journals. Stop making things up to feel important. Just sit there, drink your drink, and stop accosting the VIPs. They turned and walked away before I could respond, diving back into the crowd to repair whatever damage they imagined I had caused. I watched them go, feeling a strange mix of anger and pity. They were so terrified of the truth that they could not even recognize it when it walked up and introduced itself. A few minutes later, Dylan appeared. He looked rattled. There was a sheen of sweat on his upper lip that the ocean breeze had not dried. He scanned the area, saw I was alone again, and hurried over. "Hey," he said, checking his phone. "Everything okay? Mom said you were bothering Evelyn Klein." "I was not bothering her," I said. "She likes me, which is more than I can say for the rest of this family." Dylan ran a hand through his hair. "Look, just keep it down. Okay, I am trying to close a conversation with a guy from a venture capital firm in New York. He is asking a lot of questions about my time at the logistics startup." "The one you got fired from after 4 months?" I asked. "I resigned," Dylan snapped. "Creative differences. Anyway, I told him I was a managing partner there. If he asks you if anyone asks you, just be vague. Say I was in leadership. Do not give dates. You told Dad you were telling people you were in consulting," I said. "Now you are a managing partner, Dylan. You are going to trip over your own timeline." He looked at me, and for a second, the mask slipped. I saw the panic underneath. He was 28 years old, and he had built a life out of smoke and mirrors. He was marrying a woman who thought he was a rock, when in reality he was just sand. "It is just for tonight," he said, his voice pleading. "Once we are married, it does not matter. The Harrows have connections. I can get a real position then. I just need to get across the finish line. Please, Zoe, do not mess this up for me." "I am not the one lying to my fiancé," I said. "It is not lying," he insisted. "It is projecting success. Everyone does it. Just stay here, please." He patted my shoulder, a gesture that felt more like he was checking to see if I was still solid enough to cause a problem, and hurried back toward the bar. I watched him intercept a man in a navy suit. I heard fragments of his voice as he passed. "Absolutely, when I was overseeing the merger in London." Dylan had never been to London. I sat back, shaking my head. The whole evening felt like a fragile glass sculpture balancing on a vibrating washing machine. It was only a matter of time before it shattered. I was staring at the ocean, trying to calm my racing heart, when a shadow fell across my table. I looked up, expecting my mother again, ready to scold me for breathing too loudly. But it was a staff member. He was young, dressed in the crisp white uniform of the catering team. He held a silver tray with a single fresh glass of champagne on it. "I did not order this," I said. "I am still nursing my first one." "Compliments of the host, ma'am," he said softly. He placed the glass down in front of me. Underneath the base of the flute was a small, folded square of heavy cardstock, the kind of paper used for very expensive personal stationery. The server gave me a quick, almost imperceptible nod, and then vanished back into the shadows of the pillar. I looked at the note. My pulse began to hammer in my throat. I glanced around. My parents were 20 feet away, laughing at something the senator said. Dylan was deep in his fabrication about London. No one was looking at table 19. I reached out and slid the paper out from under the glass. I unfolded it. The handwriting was bold, slanted, and written in black fountain pen ink. It was not a generic welcome note. It was 3 sentences that made the hair on my arms stand up. The stress distribution methodology was indeed brilliant, but the variable load joint deserves a better patent strategy. Save the second dance for me. And then, at the very bottom, in smaller letters, I know exactly who you are. There was no signature. There did not need to be. I looked up, scanning the room. Far across the terrace, near the head table, Graham Harrow was standing in a circle of men in tuxedos. He was not talking. He was looking directly at me. He raised his glass a fraction of an inch. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were locked on mine. My parents had spent the entire night terrified that I would be discovered. They had hidden me, shushed me, and erased me. But as I held that heavy cardstock in my hand, I realized something that made me want to laugh and scream at the same time. The only person in this entire zip code who actually mattered had known exactly where I was the whole time. The invisibility spell was broken, and judging by the look on Graham Harrow's face, the real party was just about to begin. The sun had begun to dip below the horizon, painting the Rhode Island sky in bruising shades of purple and charcoal. The string quartet faded into a final, polite resolution, and the distinct, sharp sound of a spoon tapping against a crystal glass cut through the murmur of 200 conversations. It was a sound that commanded attention, a Pavlovian bell for the wealthy that signaled it was time to stop drinking and start listening. I was still sitting at table 19, the note from Graham Harrow tucked securely inside my clutch like a radioactive isotope. I had not moved. I had barely breathed. The champagne in front of me had gone warm, the bubbles rising in slow, lazy trails that looked like tiny pearls trying to escape a sinking ship. The terrace lights flickered on, bathing the stone patio in a soft, golden glow that was designed to make everyone look 10 years younger and a tax bracket richer. The staff moved silently to the perimeter, their hands clasped behind their backs, blending into the hedges. It was time for the toasts. Lila's mother, Catherine Harrow, took the microphone first. She was a woman of quiet elegance, wearing a deep emerald gown that did not need sparkles to catch the eye. She stood next to her husband, her hand resting lightly on the crook of his arm, and when she spoke, her voice was warm, steady, and completely devoid of pretense. "When Lila was a little girl," she began, smiling down at her daughter, "she used to bring home injured birds, stray cats, and once, a very confused raccoon. She has always had a heart that seeks to heal and to hold. We always wondered who she would choose to build a life with. We knew it had to be someone who understood that her kindness is not a weakness, but her greatest strength." She turned to Dylan. My brother was doing his best impression of a humble prince. His hands clasped in front of him, head bowed slightly in performed modesty. "Dylan," Mrs. Harrow said, "we are so pleased to welcome you into our home and our family. You have made our daughter smile in a way we have not seen in years. That is all we could ever ask for. Welcome." The applause was polite, warm, and genuine. It was a perfect toast, short, sweet, and rooted in love. It made my stomach churn because I knew the man she was welcoming was a fabrication. She was welcoming a mirage. Then, the microphone was handed to my mother. I saw Eleanor Cooper take the stage. She adjusted the microphone stand. Even though it was already at the perfect height, she smoothed her silver dress. She waited for total silence, demanding the room's full attention with her posture alone. She looked every inch the proud matriarch, the successful mother of a successful son. I shrank down in my seat, bracing for impact. "Good evening, everyone," my mother purred. Her voice was 2 octaves higher than her normal speaking voice, a tone she reserved for bank tellers she was trying to charm and maitre d's she was trying to intimidate. "I am Eleanor, Dylan's mother, and this is my husband, Robert." She gestured to my father, who stood a step behind her, looking like he wanted to dissolve into the landscaping. "When we look at Dylan," she continued, "we see a young man of such extraordinary potential. From the moment he was born, he had a presence, a light. He has always been the kind of person who draws others in. He has a gift, really, a gift for connection, a gift for seeing the world not as it is, but as it could be." I dug my fingernails into my palms. Potential, presence, gift. These were the words you used when your son had no resume. She was talking about his vibes because she could not talk about his achievements. She could not say he was a captain of industry, so she said he was a captain of spirit. "We are so incredibly proud of the man he has become," she said, her voice trembling with a carefully manufactured emotion. "He is our heart. He is our legacy. And seeing him standing here today, in this beautiful setting, joining this magnificent family well, it is the culmination of everything we have ever dreamed of for our child." Our child. Singular. I waited. I held my breath, waiting for the addendum, the obligatory footnote. And of course, we are so happy our daughter Zoe could be here to celebrate with him. It never came. She smiled, raised her glass, and said, "To Dylan and Lila, may your life be as beautiful as this evening." The applause was enthusiastic, but I felt a cold hollow opening up in my chest. It was not just that she had ignored me, it was that she had effectively erased me from the narrative of the family entirely. In her version of the story, the Coopers had one child, one legacy, one point of pride. I was not even a footnote. I was a redaction. My father took the microphone next. He looked terrified. He held it like it was a live grenade that had already had the pin pulled. "Yes," he mumbled, clearing his throat. "What Eleanor said. We are very happy. Dylan, you have done well. Lila, you are lovely. To the happy couple." He handed the microphone back to the staff as fast as humanly possible, practically throwing it at the poor waiter. He stepped back, wiping his brow, looking like a man who had just survived a firing squad. The room chuckled, a low, forgiving sound. They interpreted his brevity as fatherly stoicism, rather than the panic of a man who was terrified of saying the wrong thing and toppling the house of cards. And then, silence fell. A different kind of silence. Graham Harrow stepped forward. He did not take the microphone from the stand. He detached it, holding it in his hand, walking out from behind the safety of the head table. He moved into the open space of the terrace, closing the distance between himself and the guests. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop. The waiters stopped moving. The wind off the ocean seemed to hold its breath. Graham Harrow was a man who commanded gravity. "Thank you, everyone," he said. His voice was deep, gravelly, and calm. It was the voice of a man who had negotiated billion-dollar mergers and stared down Senate subcommittees. "It is a rare thing to see two families come together like this." He paused, looking at Dylan. Dylan smiled, but it was tight. The corners of his mouth were twitching. "When a man asks for your daughter's hand," Graham said, pacing slowly back and forth, "you do certain things. You are a father. After all, you want to know who is coming into your house, who is coming into your life." He chuckled softly, and the room laughed with him. It was a nervous sound. "So, we looked into Dylan," Graham continued, his tone conversational, almost breezy. "We did our due diligence, standard procedure. We looked at his background. We looked at his history." My parents were frozen. I could see them from my corner. My mother was holding her champagne glass so tightly I thought the stem would snap. My father was staring at his shoes. "We wanted to know about his character," Graham said, "because character is not what you say at a party. Character is what you do when you think no one is watching. Character is what you build with your own hands." He stopped pacing. He stood perfectly still in the center of the terrace. The silence was absolute. You could hear the waves crashing against the rocks below, a rhythmic thudding that sounded like a heartbeat. "And in looking at the Cooper family," Graham said, his voice dropping a decibel, becoming more intimate, more intense, "I found something very interesting. I found a discrepancy." The word hung in the air. Discrepancy. My mother's head snapped up. Dylan's smile finally broke, shattering into a look of pure confusion and dread. Graham turned. He was no longer looking at Dylan. He was no longer looking at the guests. He turned his body slowly, deliberately, until he was facing the back of the terrace. He was facing table 19. He scanned the darkness, his eyes narrowing slightly as he cut through the layers of decorative hydrangeas and stone pillars. "I have heard a lot about Dylan tonight," Graham said. "I have heard about his potential, his presence, his gift." He paused. "But I have a question." He took a step toward my direction, and his voice rang out, clear and sharp as a bell. "Where is Zoe Cooper?" The question hit the room like a thunderclap. Heads turned. 200 people shifted in their seats, craning their necks, looking around in confusion. Who the name rippled through the crowd in whispered echoes. Zoe. Who is Zoe? My parents went rigid. It was as if they had been struck by lightning. My mother's mouth opened, but no sound came out. My father looked like he was about to faint. Dylan looked at Graham, then at his parents, and then he started to scan the room frantically, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and anger. He looked like a cornered animal. I sat there, frozen. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard, I thought it would bruise the bone. He had done it. He had actually done it. Graham did not wait for an answer. He did not need one. He knew exactly where I was. Is Zoe Cooper here tonight? He asked again. Louder this time. It was not a question of curiosity. It was a summons. I slowly stood up. My legs felt like they were made of lead. My hands were shaking. I stepped out from behind the pillar. Moving away from the safety of the floral arrangement, the movement caught the light. I am here, I said. My voice was small, barely a squeak. I cleared my throat and tried again. I am here. Graham saw me. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. It was the first time I had seen him smile like that all night. It wasn't the polite smile of a host. It was the satisfied smile of a man who had found exactly what he was looking for. There she is, he said, his voice warm, welcoming, and loud enough to reach the back row. Hidden away in the back, he beckoned to me with his free hand, an inviting, insistent gesture. Dr. Cooper, he said, please, come up here, join us. The crowd parted. People turned in their chairs to look at me. I could feel their eyes, hundreds of them, sliding over my department store dress, my sensible shoes, my terrified face. I began to walk. It felt like walking through a minefield. I had to navigate past the tables of the venture capitalists, past the hospital board members, past the people my parents had spent the last 3 hours trying to impress. As I walked, I looked at my parents. They were staring at me with an expression I will never forget. It was not just anger, it was horror. It was the look of people who watch their carefully constructed reality dissolve in real time. My mother looked like she was witnessing a car crash. My father looked like he wanted to be the car crash. I walked past Dylan. He hissed at me, a sound barely audible over the wind. What are you doing? I did not answer him. I kept walking until I reached the open space where Graham Harrow stood. He did not treat me like an interloper. He stepped forward and offered me his hand, treating me with a level of deference that shocked the room into a second, deeper silence. Ladies and gentlemen, Graham said, still holding my hand. Turning me to face the crowd, I would like to introduce you to the other Cooper. He looked at my parents, and for a fleeting second, the warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, hard steel. I noticed, he said pleasantly, that neither of you mentioned her. The accusation hung there, suspended in the salt air, heavy and undeniable. He had not just introduced me, he had indicted them, and the trial was just beginning. Standing next to Graham Harrow felt like standing next to a cliff face that had decided to wear a tuxedo. There was a solidity to him, a density of presence that made the frantic energy of my parents feel like cheap static. I stood there, my hand still in his, and I waited for the wave of nausea that usually accompanied public attention. I waited for the urge to hunch my shoulders, to cross my arms, to make myself smaller, but the wave did not come. Instead, a strange, cold clarity washed over me. It was the same feeling I got in the lab when a complex equation finally balanced out. The variables had aligned. The unknown factors were resolving. For the first time in my life, standing in front of 200 of the wealthiest people in New England, I did not feel like a mistake. I felt like the only real thing in the room. Graham did not let go of my hand immediately. He held it for a beat longer than necessary, a physical anchor that told the room exactly where his loyalty lay. Then he released me. But he did not step away. He stayed close, creating a visual unit. Graham, the host, and Zoe, the guest of honor he had personally retrieved from the shadows. He raised the microphone again, The silence on the terrace was absolute. Even the ocean seemed to hush, the waves lapsing into a respectful lull against the rocks below. "For those of you who do not know," Graham began, his voice rolling out with that same terrifying, conversational ease, "Dr. Zoe Cooper is not just Dylan's sister." He emphasized the title, Doctor. He punched the word into the air like a stamp of authentication. "She is the director of the Stonebridge Biodesign Center." Graham continued. He was not reading from a card. He knew this. He had memorized it. "She is currently leading a team of engineers who are redesigning the way the world approaches pediatric prosthetics. I have been following her work for years. She has developed a variable load knee joint that costs less than $50 to manufacture. It is being used right now in clinics in Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa to help children walk to school." He paused, letting the information land. "While many of us in this room move money around," Graham said, his eyes scanning the crowd, landing briefly on a few of his hedge fund peers. "Dr. Cooper is moving humanity forward. She is doing the kind of work that most of us only write checks for at tax time. She is building miracles in a basement lab in Boston." The reaction was immediate and visceral. It started as a ripple, a murmur of surprise, a sharp intake of breath, and then it solidified. I saw the faces in the front row change. The politely bored expressions vanished, replaced by genuine astonishment. People leaned forward. A woman near the front, the one with the heavy diamonds who had been ignoring everyone, put her drink down and looked at me with wide, assessing eyes. It was admiration. I recognized it, though I had never seen it directed at me in a setting like this. It was the look people gave to something valuable. My parents, however, did not look admiring. They looked like they were trapped in a nightmare where they were naked and everyone else was fully clothed. My mother's smile was still plastered on her face, but it had become rictus, a terrifying grimace of panic. Her eyes were darting between me, Graham, and the guests, trying to calculate the damage. My father had gone pale, his hands clasped so tight in front of him that his knuckles were white. Graham turned his body. He pivoted away from the crowd and faced my parents directly. It was a small movement, but it felt like a tank turret rotating to find its target. "Robert, Eleanor," Graham said. His voice was pleasant. It was cordial. It was the voice of a man asking a neighbor about their rose bushes. "I have to admit, I am confused." My father made a noise that sounded like a dry cough. "Confused, Graham?" "Yes," Graham said. "I have listened to 3 toasts tonight. I have heard a great deal about Dylan's charm. I have heard about his smile. I have heard about his, what was the word, vibes." A few people in the crowd chuckled, but it was a dark, nervous laughter. They sensed the trap snapping shut. "But I did not hear a single word about the fact that your daughter is a leading researcher in her field," Graham said. "I did not hear a word about the grants she has secured. I did not hear a word about the lives she is changing." He let the silence stretch. It was excruciating. It was a weapon. "I noticed neither of you mentioned your daughter at all," Graham said softly. "Why is that?" The question was simple, but it carried the weight of an indictment. He was not asking for an explanation. He was asking them to confess. My mother, to her credit, or perhaps her detriment, tried to fight back. She was a survivor of 1,000 country club skirmishes, and she was not going to go down without spinning the narrative. She took a half step forward, smoothing her silver dress, trying to regain the center of gravity. "Oh, Graham," she said, letting out a breathless, airy laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "You are so kind to say all that. Really, we are very proud of Zoe. Of course, we did not want to distract from the engagement. Tonight is about Dylan and Lila. We did not want to overshadow their moment with technical details." She gestured vaguely at me, as if my career was a stain she was trying to wipe off the table. "We wanted to keep the focus where it belongs," she added, her voice gaining a little more confidence as she fell back on the rules of etiquette. "On the happy couple," Graham looked at her. He did not blink. He did not smile. He looked at her with the clinical detachment of a scientist examining a particularly interesting and particularly malignant bacteria sample. Distract, Graham repeated the word, tasting it. Yes, my mother said, nodding eagerly. You know how it is. We did not want to bore the guests with business talk. Bore them? Graham asked. He gestured to the crowd, to the 200 people who were currently hanging on every word. I do not think anyone here is bored. Eleanor, I think they are fascinated. He took a step closer to her. And as for distracting from the engagement, Graham said, his voice dropping to a register that was both intimate and incredibly loud. Most parents would call having a daughter like Zoe a highlight. Most parents would be shouting it from the rooftops. They would not be hiding her behind a pillar on the lower terrace. The mention of the pillar drew a gasp from the crowd. He had seen everything. The seating chart, the isolation, the calculated erasure. My father flinched as if he had been slapped. My mother's mouth opened and closed, but her social reflexes had failed her. There was no etiquette rule for this. There was no polite way to say, we hid her because she makes our son look like a failure. Dylan saw the ship sinking and decided to try and bail it out with a teaspoon. He stepped forward, his face flushed, his smile stretching so wide it looked painful. It is true, Dylan announced, his voice booming too loudly over the speakers. He sounded like a bad actor reading lines off a cue card he had never seen before. Zoe is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. We are always saying that, aren't we? Mom, she is the brains of the family. We are so proud of her. He reached out as if to pat my shoulder. But I took a subtle step back. His hand fell into the empty air. She is just so modest, Dylan continued, sweating visibly now. She hates the spotlight. We were just respecting her privacy. That is all it was. Right, Zoe? You hate this stuff. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Save me. His eyes said, lie for me. Be the good sister and lie. I looked at him. I looked at the brother who had spent his entire life sucking the oxygen out of every room, leaving me to suffocate in the corner. I looked at the brother who had let me sit at table 19 while he played Prince. I said nothing. I just looked at him with a calm, neutral expression. Graham did not let Dylan off the hook. He turned his gaze to my brother, and the look of disappointment on his face was far worse than anger. Modesty is one thing, Graham said. Erasure is another. He turned back to the crowd, addressing the room at large. When we did our due diligence, Graham said, we looked at the Cooper family history. We like to know who we are going into business with. And do you know what we found? He paused. The wind whipped the tablecloths. No one moved. We found a website for the Cooper family business, Graham said. It lists Robert and Eleanor Cooper. It lists Dylan Mercer as the heir apparent. There is a bio for Dylan. There are photos of Dylan. There are updates about Dylan's various ventures. He looked at my parents. But there is no mention of a daughter, Graham said. Not one. We looked at your holiday cards for the last 5 years. Dylan is in all of them. Zoe is in none of them. We looked at your social media. It is a shrine to one child. He let that sink in. The cruelty of it. The systematic, deliberate removal of a human being from her own family. She has been curated out, Graham said. The phrase hung in the air like smoke. Almost as if she did not exist. As if she were a secret you were keeping. He looked at my mother, who was now trembling. The facade had cracked completely. Under the lights, she looked old and small and mean. I have to ask, Graham said, his voice filled with a terrible, quiet curiosity. Why would you hide a woman who saves children for a living? What exactly are you ashamed of? The question was unanswerable, because the answer was that they were ashamed of themselves. They were ashamed that I was real and they were fake. They were ashamed that I had achieved something they could not buy. A hush fell over the party that was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb, the string quartet, the ocean, the clinking glasses. It all faded away. The celebration had died. The engagement party had turned into an autopsy, and Graham Harrow was holding the scalpel. I looked at the crowd. I saw Lila, the bride, standing near the cake. She had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. She was looking at Dylan like she had never seen him before, like he was a stranger. I looked at Evelyn Klein. She raised her martini glass to me in a silent salute, and then I looked at my parents. They were standing in the wreckage of their own ambition. They had come here tonight to sell a lie, and instead, they had been forced to buy the truth. Graham turned back to me. The hardness left his face, replaced by that warm, respectful anchor. "Well," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The Harrows do not hide brilliance. We celebrate it." He raised his glass. "To Dr. Zoe Cooper," he said, the most impressive person in the room. The toast was not for the couple, it was for the exile, and as 200 people raised their glasses to me, I looked at my mother one last time. She could not meet my eyes. She looked down at the floor, defeated by the one thing she had warned me against: the truth. It turned out, the truth did not embarrass me at all. The aftermath of the toast was not a celebration, it was a breach of the dam. The moment Graham Harrow lowered his glass, the invisible barrier that had separated me from the rest of the party dissolved completely. I stepped down from the raised platform, my legs still trembling slightly from the adrenaline, and I expected to fade back into the woodwork. I expected the guests to clap politely and return to their conversations about tax shelters and summer homes. I was wrong. They swarmed. It started with Evelyn Klein, who was the first to reach me. She gripped my shoulders with hands that were surprisingly strong. "I told you," she said, her eyes dancing with vindication. "I told you he knew," but before I could respond, a man in a velvet tuxedo stepped in. I recognized him as the head of a major philanthropic trust in Boston. "Dr. Cooper," he said, extending a hand. "I am absolutely fascinated by what Graham said. $50. You are manufacturing a functional load-bearing joint for $50. How are you managing the stress testing on that budget?" "We use a honeycomb structure injected with a high-density polymer," I said automatically, slipping into the comfort of technical language like a warm coat. "It mimics the trabecular structure of human bone. It reduces material costs by 60% without sacrificing durability." "Brilliant," a woman behind him said. She was wearing diamonds that probably cost more than my entire lab budget for a year. "And the distribution," Graham mentioned clinics. "We partner with local NGOs," I explained, finding my footing. "We do not just drop off the limbs. We train local technicians to fit and repair them. It is about sustainability, not just charity." More people pressed in. They were not looking at me with the pity or dismissal I had seen in my parents' eyes for decades. They were looking at me with hunger. These were people who understood the value of a breakthrough. They understood efficiency. They understood impact. For the first time in my life, I was not the awkward sister or the disappointment. I was the asset. I answered questions about tensile strength. I answered questions about pediatric growth plates. I answered questions about the psychological impact of mobility on children in war zones. I spoke for 20 minutes straight, and for 20 minutes, I felt entirely, completely myself. But as I spoke, a part of my brain was still tracking the movements of the people who had tried to silence me. I looked over the shoulder of a cardiac surgeon who was asking about my FDA approval timeline. I saw them. My parents had retreated. In a twist of irony so perfect it felt scripted. They had backed themselves into the exact corner where they had originally seated me. They were standing by table 19, half hidden by the overflowing urn of white hydrangeas. They were not mingling. They were arguing. It was a furious, hissed exchange. My mother was gripping her clutch so hard her knuckles were white. She was whispering something venomous to my father. Her face contorted into a mask of blame. My father looked like a man whose soul had left his body, leaving behind only a shell in a tuxedo. He was staring at the ground, shaking his head weakly. They looked small. They looked petty. They looked like exactly what they were, people who had bet on the wrong horse and were now watching the race finish without them. I felt a tap on my elbow. I turned to see Lila, the bride. She did not look like the radiant, happy woman who had been floating through the party an hour ago. She looked pale. Her eyes were wide and searching, and her hands were clasped tightly in front of her. "Zoe," she said softly, "can I steal you for a second?" The crowd, sensing the importance of the bride, parted to let us through. Lila led me a few feet away, toward the edge of the terrace where the stone railing overlooked the ocean. It was slightly quieter here, away from the crush of the guests. She turned to me. There were no pleasantries, no social buffers. "Did they really tell you to hide?" she asked. The question was blunt. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the tremor underneath it. She was asking me to confirm that the people she was about to marry into were monsters. I looked at her. I saw the kindness in her face, the same kindness that had made her help the waiter with the broken glass earlier. She deserved the truth. "Yes," I said. "They told me to sit in the back. They told me not to speak to anyone. And they specifically told me not to mention my work because it was boring and grotesque." Lila closed her eyes. She let out a breath that shuddered through her entire frame. "Grotesque," she repeated. "That is the word they used. That is the word," I said. "I thought," she started, then stopped. She shook her head. "I thought Dylan was just protective. He always said you were shy. He said you had social anxiety and hated crowds. He said he was trying to keep the pressure off you." "I lecture to auditoriums of 300 students," I said gently. "I present at international conferences. I do not have social anxiety. Lila, I have a family who thinks I am bad for their brand." Lila looked at me, and I saw the heartbreak beginning to fracture her expression. She was realizing that the man she loved had built a fortress of lies to keep her out. "I am so sorry," she whispered. "I had no idea." "Excuse me," the voice came from behind us. It was tentative, but firm. We both turned. Standing there was a young woman in a catering uniform. She was holding a tray of empty glasses against her chest like a shield. Her name tag read, Tessa. She looked terrified, her eyes darting toward the management staff, but she stood her ground. "I am sorry to interrupt," Tessa said, her voice shaking slightly. "But I heard them too." Lila frowned, stepping closer to the girl. "What do you mean?" Tessa took a deep breath. "Earlier, when the Coopers arrived, I was setting up the welcome station near the entrance. I heard Mrs. Cooper talking to Dr. Cooper." Tessa looked at me, her cheeks flushing pink. "She told you to sit in the corner," Tessa said, reciting the memory. "She said, 'Do not embarrass us.' She said, 'No research talk.' She grabbed your arm. I saw it." Lila stared at the server. "You are sure?" "Yes, ma'am," Tessa said. Then she turned to me, and her expression shifted from fear to shy admiration. I wanted to say thank you. I am applying to biomedical engineering programs for next fall. I read your paper on the mechanics of low-cost prosthetics for my senior thesis. The section on friction reduction in the joint socket, it was amazing. It is the reason I want to go into the field." I felt a lump form in my throat. This was the work. This was the legacy. Not the money, not the galas, but this. A girl holding a tray of dirty glasses who had read my methodology and decided to change the world. "Thank you, Tessa," I said, my voice thick. "That means more to me than you know." "Is there a problem here?" The voice was sharp, cutting through the moment like a serrated knife. My mother had materialized. She had clearly seen us talking to the staff and had decided to intervene before more damage could be done. She marched over, her silver dress rustling aggressively. "Zoe," she snapped, "why are you bothering the help? She has a job to do." She turned her glare on Tessa. "And you? You should be clearing tables, not gossiping with the guests. I will be speaking to the catering manager about this. You are being incredibly unprofessional." Tessa shrank back, her face draining of color. She looked like she was about to cry. "She was not gossiping," Lila said, her voice cold. "She was telling the truth, Unlike some people. My mother froze. She looked at Lila, her smile faltering. Lila, darling, surely you are not listening to a waitress. These people will say anything for a tip. She is lying. I am not lying, Tessa said, her voice small but defiant. Quiet, my mother hissed, stepping toward the girl. You do not speak to me like that. You are a server. You are invisible. Do you understand? You are nobody. Eleanor, the name was spoken at a normal volume, but it carried the weight of a gavel strike. Graham Harrow was standing 5 feet away. I had not heard him approach. He was standing with his hands in his pockets, looking at my mother with an expression of profound disappointment. Graham, my mother stammered, pivoting instantly to damage control mode. This girl was being rude. I was handling it. She was not being rude, Graham said calmly. She was having a conversation with my daughter and an honored guest. He walked over to Tessa. He did not look at my mother. He looked at the server. What is your name? He asked gently. Tessa, sir, she whispered. Tessa, Graham said. In this house, nobody is invisible, and nobody is a nobody. If you are applying to engineering programs, you should send your CV to my office on Monday. We have a scholarship fund for promising students in the sciences. Tessa's jaw dropped. Sir, Go on now, Graham said kindly. Finish your shift. You are doing a fine job. Tessa nodded, tears welling in her eyes, and scurried away. Graham turned back to my mother. He did not yell. He did not raise a hand. He simply looked at her, stripping away every layer of social armor she possessed. Do not ever speak to someone in my home like that again, Graham said. Power is not about who you can silence. Eleanor, it is about who you can listen to. My mother turned a shade of gray that matched the stone terrace. She opened her mouth to argue, to spin, to charm, but she found nothing there. The tank was empty. She turned on her heel and walked away, trembling with rage and humiliation. Lila watched her go. Then she turned to look at the space where Dylan was standing across the room. He was laughing with a group of men, unaware that the ground beneath him had just liquefied. He is just like her, Lila whispered. It was not a question. It was a realization. She looked at me. He is just like her. Isn't he? The charm, the need to control the image, it is all a performance. He has his moments, I said, trying to be fair, though I did not know why. But he learned from the best. Lila nodded slowly. The look in her eyes had changed. The starry-eyed adoration was gone. In its place was the cold, hard calculation of a woman who realizes she almost bought a house with a cracked foundation. I need to think, Lila said. She squeezed my hand. Thank you, Zoe, for being real. She walked away, heading not toward Dylan, but toward the interior of the house. She needed space. She needed silence. I watched her go, feeling a heavy sadness for her. She was a good person. She did not deserve this collision course with reality. You planned this. I jumped. Dylan had materialized at my side. He had dragged me into the shadow of a large decorative pillar, away from the prying eyes of the guests. His face was flushed, his eyes wild. He was sweating through his shirt. The charm was gone. The prince was dead. This was the real Dylan, the one who threw tantrums when he did not get the toy he wanted. Excuse me, I said. You planned this, he hissed, his finger jabbing toward my face. You set this up. You talked to Graham beforehand. You gave that waitress money to speak up. You did this to humiliate me. I looked at him. I looked at the brother I had spent my life trying to please, trying to support, trying to protect, and I realized that he was not just selfish. He was delusional. I did not speak to Graham until 10 minutes ago, I said calmly, and I have never met that waitress in my life. She just happened to read a paper I wrote. A paper you would know about if you had ever asked me a single question about my life in the last 5 years. Bullshit, Dylan spat. You are jealous. You have always been jealous. You see me getting this life, this money, this family, and you cannot stand it. You had to come here and ruin it. You had to make it about you." "I did not make it about me," I said, my voice rising slightly. "Graham did, because he respects work. Dylan, he respects truth. He saw a discrepancy, and he asked a question." "You should have lied," Dylan said, his voice cracking. "When he asked you up there, you should have said Mom and Dad were right. You should have played along. That is what families do. They protect each other." "No, Dylan," I said, stepping closer to him. "That is what accomplices do. Families support each other. You do not want a sister. You want a prop. You are ruined to me," he snarled. "Do you hear me? After tonight, you are dead to me." "I was already dead to you," I said softly. "You just didn't expect the corpse to wake up and have witnesses." He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing. He had no comeback for that. He had no script for a version of me that fought back. "I am leaving," I said. "I have had enough champagne, and I have had enough of you." I turned and walked away. I did not walk back toward the party. I did not go to say goodbye to Graham or Evelyn. I needed to get out. I found a side exit, a small gate in the stone wall that led to a cliffside path. I pushed it open and stepped out. The wind hit me instantly. It was cold, smelling of salt and seaweed and vast, open space. I walked to the edge of the cliff and looked down at the dark water churning against the rocks. I took a deep breath. I filled my lungs with the cold air, letting it scour out the scent of expensive perfume and desperate lies. I felt light. I felt dizzy. For 28 years, I had been holding my breath, waiting for permission to exist. I had been living underwater, letting the pressure of my family's expectations crush me into a diamond they could sell. But tonight, the pressure was gone. I had breached the surface. I stood there in the dark, listening to the ocean, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel alone. I felt free. The morning after the engagement party, I woke up with a headache that had nothing to do with champagne and everything to do with the emotional whiplash of being publicly vindicated and privately disowned in the span of an hour. My phone had been buzzing intermittently since dawn. I had ignored every call from my mother and every text from Dylan. I knew what they would say. They would oscillate between blaming me for ruining their lives and begging me to fix it. I did not have the energy for either. Then, around 10 in the morning, a message came through from a number I did not recognize. "Graham gave me your number. I know you probably want to be left alone, but I need to speak with you. Not about Dylan, about you. Can we meet for coffee? Lila." I stared at the screen. Lila, the bride who had watched her fiancé unravel in real time. I debated ignoring it. I wanted to crawl back under my duvet and pretend the Harrows and the Coopers were fictional characters in a book I could close. But I remembered Lila's face on the terrace, the confusion, the kindness, the dawning horror. She was innocent in this collateral damage. I texted back a location. A small, independent coffee shop in downtown Providence, far enough away from Watch Hill that we were unlikely to run into anyone wearing a tuxedo or a monocle. When I walked in 40 minutes later, Lila was already there. She was sitting at a corner table, nursing a large mug of tea. She looked different. The glamorous, ethereal creature in the white silk dress was gone. In her place was a woman in a gray, oversized sweater and leggings, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked tired. She looked human. I bought a black coffee and sat down across from her. "Hi," I said. "Hi," she replied. She wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "Thank you for coming. I know my family is probably the last thing you want to deal with right now." "Your father was actually the highlight of my evening," I said honestly. "It is my own family I'm trying to avoid." Lila managed a weak smile. "My dad has a way of doing that. He calls it leveling the room. He hates pretense. It makes him physically itchy." She looked down at her tea, watching the steam rise. The air between us was heavy, but it was not hostile. It was the heavy silence of two people standing in the wreckage of a car crash, checking to see if they were bleeding. I did not sleep last night, Lila said quietly. I stayed up thinking, replaying things, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I have been ignoring a lot of red flags. I took a sip of my coffee. What kind of red flags? The way Dylan talks, she said. She looked up at me, her eyes sharp and intelligent. He is charming. God, he is so charming. He makes you feel like you are the only person in the world. But whenever I ask for specifics about his work, his past, his plans, he pivots. He does this thing where he turns the question back on me, or he makes a joke, or he gives me this big, vague speech about ambition. He performs ambition, I said. The words slipped out before I could check them. Lila's eyes widened. Yes, that is exactly it. He performs it. He acts out the role of a successful man. But there is no substance underneath. It is all smoke. She leaned forward. I asked him once about a project he said he managed. He told me it was proprietary, and he could not discuss the details. I bought it because I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe he was the man he pretended to be. But last night, seeing him panic when my dad asked a simple question, seeing how he treated you, she shook her head. That was not just a bad night, Zoe. That was a mask slipping. Dylan has always been good at the mask, I said. My parents taught him. They have been rehearsing that role since he was 5 years old. Lila studied my face. Tell me about it. Please, I need to understand. Why did they hide you? You are incredible. You are smart. You are successful. You are doing work that actually matters. Why would they treat you like a dirty secret? I sighed, tracing the rim of my cup. It was a question I had asked myself 1,000 times in therapy. It is not about success, I said. It is about control, and it is about image. My parents, they view life as a series of transactions. You meet the right people, you wear the right clothes, you say the right things, and you advance. Dylan fits that model. He is malleable. He will say whatever he needs to say to get in the room. I looked out the window at the passing cars. I was never malleable. I was awkward. I liked math more than mixers. I asked questions they could not answer. I did not fit the aesthetic. So, instead of trying to understand me, they decided I was a problem to be managed, a liability. They made you feel small, Lila said softly. They made me invisible, I corrected. It is safer that way. If I am invisible, I cannot say the wrong thing. I cannot embarrass them with my grotesque research. I cannot remind people that the Coopers are not perfect. It must have been so lonely, she said. It was, I admitted. But you get used to it. You learn to live in the corners. You build a life in the quiet places where they do not look. Lila reached into her bag. She pulled out a folded piece of paper. It looked like a printout of an email. You know, she said, smoothing the paper on the table, my dad did not just stumble upon your work last week. He did not just Google you before the party. Evelyn mentioned he had tried to contact me a few years ago, I said. I deleted the email. I thought it was spam. He did try to contact you, Lila said. But even before that, do you remember the Innovators Seed Grant? The one you got right after you finished your doctorate. The one that let you set up your first independent lab. I froze. Of course I remembered it. It was $50,000. It was the money that had saved my career. I had applied for it blindly. A long shot for a young researcher with no major backing. When I got the check, I had cried for 2 days. I thought it was a miracle. Yes, I said slowly. It was an anonymous donor fund through the university. I never knew who it came from. Lila slid the paper across the table. It was a copy of a transfer authorization form, dated 4 years ago. The source of the funds was the Harrow Foundation. The beneficiary was Dr. Zoe Cooper. It was him, Lila said. He read your dissertation. He thought your ideas about accessible engineering were revolutionary. He knew you would not take money from a corporate interest, so he routed it through the university anonymously. He wanted you to have a chance. I stared at the paper. The numbers blurred slightly. $50,000. Graham Harrow had bet on me 4 years ago. While my parents were telling me I was boring, while Dylan was telling me to get a real job, a complete stranger had quietly written a check that made my entire life possible. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. I wiped it away angrily, but another followed. "He believed in me," I whispered. "He did not even know me." "He knew your work," Lila said. "And to my dad, the work is the person. He told me this morning. That girl has more integrity in her pinky finger than her entire family has in their bank accounts." I laughed. A wet, shaky sound. "He really said that—" "He did," Lila smiled, but her eyes remained sad. "Which brings me to the hard part." She took a deep breath. She pulled her hands back and clasped them in her lap. She looked at me with a direct, unflinching gaze that reminded me so much of her father it was startling. "Zoe," she said, "I need you to be honest with me. I need you to tell me the truth, even if you think it will hurt me. Especially if you think it will hurt me." "Okay," I said. "Are they using Dylan to get close to my family's money?" The question hung in the air between us. It was heavy. It was ugly. It was the thing we had both been dancing around. I looked at Lila. I saw a woman who wanted to be loved for herself, not for her last name. I saw a woman who was terrified that her romance was actually a robbery in progress. I could have lied. I could have said, "No, they love you. Dylan loves you. They are just intense." I could have protected my brother. I could have protected the fragile peace of my family. But I thought about the grant. I thought about Graham Harrow reading my dissertation. I thought about the way my mother had looked at the server. Tessa. I thought about the years of being told to sit in the back. I looked down at my coffee cup. The black liquid was still and dark. I did not say a word. I did not look up. I just sat there, letting the silence expand, letting it fill the space between us. I did not have to speak. The silence was screaming. After 10 seconds, Lila let out a long, shuddering breath. She nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." She did not cry. She just seemed to deflate, as if the last bit of hope she had been holding on to had just evaporated. "I am sorry," I said finally, and I was sorry for her. I was sorry that my family was a sinkhole that swallowed good people. "Do not be," Lila said. She sat up straighter, wiping her eyes. "Better to know now. Better to know before I sign the papers." She took a sip of her tea, her hand shaking slightly. "I am not going to break up with him today. I cannot. It is too much. I need to process this. But things are going to change. I am going to ask for a full financial disclosure. I am going to ask for a prenuptial agreement that is so tight it will cut off circulation. And I am going to ask him to explain, in detail, exactly what he does for a living. He will panic," I warned her. "He will try to charm his way out of it. He will make you feel guilty for asking." "Let him try," Lila said, and her voice had a new edge to it, a steel core. "I am done being the nice girl who just smiles and nods. If he wants to marry a Harrow, he is going to have to survive a Harrow audit." She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was warm. "Thank you, Zoe," she said, "for not lying. I know that was hard. He is your brother." "He is," I said, "but you are my friend. Or I hope you can be." "I think we are way past can be," Lila said. "We are trauma bonded now. That is a bond for life." We both laughed. And this time, it was genuine. It felt like the beginning of something real. I sat there for another hour with her. We talked about books. We talked about the coast. We talked about everything except the wedding. For the first time in my life, I was sitting across from someone in my brother's world, and I did not feel like an imposter. I felt like an equal. And as I looked at Lila, I realized that my parents had been wrong about everything. The truth did not destroy you. It was the only thing that could build something that lasted. When we finally stood up to leave, Lila hugged me. It was fierce and tight. "I'm going to call my dad," she said. "I'm going to tell him we had coffee. Tell him I said thank you," I said. "For the grant, For everything. You can tell him yourself, Lila said, smiling. He invited you to dinner next week. Just you. No parents allowed. I walked out of the coffee shop into the bright Rhode Island sunlight. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Dylan. You need to fix this. Call Mom. Now. I looked at the message. I looked at the command. I slid my thumb across the screen and deleted it. Then I put the phone back in my pocket and walked toward my car. I had a lab to get to. I had work to do. And for the first time, I did not have to hide it from anyone. The retaliation did not come with a scream. It came with a calendar invite. 3 days after the engagement party, I was sitting in my office at the Stonebridge Biodesign Center, staring at a spreadsheet of tensile strength data. When a notification popped up on my screen, it was a meeting request from Dr. Embarrass Thorne, the center's director. The subject line was blank. The time was now. Embarrass was a man who believed in efficiency. He did not call meetings without agendas unless the building was on fire or a donor had just written a check with 6 zeros. I walked down the hallway, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, feeling a prickle of unease that had nothing to do with my research. When I entered his office, Embarrass did not offer me coffee. He was standing by the window, looking out at the Boston skyline. He turned, his face unreadable. Sit down, Zoe, he said. I sat. Is everything okay? Embarrass, is this about the grant renewal? We received a communication this morning, he said. Moving to his desk, he slid a single sheet of paper across the mahogany surface. It was a printout of an email. It was sent to the Ethics Board, the Grant Oversight Committee, and the University Provost. It was anonymous. I picked it up. The text was short, formal, and devastating. To whom it may concern. It has come to my attention that there may be significant financial irregularities regarding the allocation of the Innovators Seed Grant managed by Dr. Zoe Cooper. Furthermore, there are growing concerns regarding Dr. Cooper's mental stability and her ability to lead a team in a high-pressure environment. We urge a full audit of her accounts and a review of her behavioral conduct before further funds are released. I read it twice. The phrasing was generic enough to be plausible, but specific enough to be lethal. Mental stability, irregularities, these were buzzwords that paused careers. Embarrass, I said, my voice steady. You know this is baseless. My books are open. Every penny is accounted for. I know that, Embarrass said, rubbing his temples. And I know you. You are the most disciplined researcher I have. But Zoe, when an allegation like misuse of funds hits the provost's inbox, we are legally required to trigger a review. Your accounts are frozen as of 9 this morning, pending an internal investigation. Frozen. I felt the blood drain from my face. Embarrass, we are in the middle of a prototype run. If I cannot pay the fabrication shop, we lose our slot. We lose months. I am sorry, he said. My hands are tied. Who would do this? Zoe. Do you have enemies in the field? A rival lab. I looked at the email again. I recognized the syntax. Significant irregularities. Behavioral conduct. It sounded like a performance review from a corporate HR department. It sounded like my father trying to sound official. It is not a rival lab, I said, placing the paper back on the desk. It is personal. I walked back to my office, my heart hammering a rhythm of pure rage against my ribs. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Dylan. You need to fix this. Call Mom and apologize. Tell them you were drunk. Tell them you lied. Or I will make sure people see the real you. I stared at the screen. The real me. The unstable one. The difficult one. The one who needed to be managed. They were not just mad. They were trying to dismantle my credibility so that if I spoke up again, no one would believe me. It was a preemptive strike. I did not reply. Instead, I sat down at my computer. If they wanted a war, I needed to know the terrain. I started digging. I did not look at family photos or text messages. I looked at the one place where truth actually lived: public records. I went to the United States Patent and Trademark Office database. I typed in Mercer, Dylan. I expected to find nothing. Dylan had never invented anything in his life unless you counted a cocktail made of energy drinks and cheap vodka. But the search returned a hit. A provisional patent application filed 4 months ago. Title Framework for Variable Load Suspension in Articulated Mechanics. My breath hitched. I clicked on the filing. The abstract was dense, filled with legal jargon, but the diagrams were unmistakable. It was my knee joint. It was the honeycomb structure. It was the specific geometry I had spent 3 years perfecting. And there, listed as the primary inventor Dylan Mercer, listed as a contributor Zoe Cooper. He had listed himself as the creator and me as the assistant. I felt a wave of nausea so violent I had to grip the edge of the desk. He had not just stolen my parents' attention, he was trying to steal my life's work. He was trying to monetize the very thing he had called grotesque. I looked at the legal representative on the filing. Sterling Associates. I quickly searched the firm. They were a boutique IP law firm in Boston. Their retainer fees started at $10,000. Dylan did not have $10,000. But 4 months ago, he had started dating Lila Harrow. He had used the social capital of dating a Harrow to secure a lawyer to steal his sister's invention. Likely planning to sell the patent to a medical supply conglomerate for a quick payout once the marriage was secure. This was not a mistake. This was a strategy. I grabbed my bag. I did not go home. I drove straight to the Harrow Industries headquarters in downtown Providence. I did not have an appointment, but when I gave my name to the receptionist, she picked up the phone, whispered 2 words, and then directed me to the top floor. Graham Harrow's office was an expanse of glass and steel that overlooked the city. When I walked in, he was standing by a whiteboard, looking at a schematic for a wind turbine. He capped his marker and turned to me. "Zoe," he said, "to what do I owe the pleasure you look like you are ready to hit someone?" "I might be," I said. I did not sit down. "My parents flagged my lab for a financial audit this morning, and I just found out my brother filed a provisional patent on my research 4 months ago." Graham's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. He did not look shocked. He looked focused. "The honeycomb joint?" "Yes." "And let me guess," Graham said, walking over to his desk. "He listed himself as the primary inventor." "Yes." Graham nodded slowly. "Smart, evil, but smart. If he controls the IP, he controls you. He knew you would never sue him because he is family, and if you did, he would claim you were the erratic sister he was trying to help." "I need a lawyer," I said. "Not a family lawyer, a shark." Graham sat on the edge of his desk. He looked at me with that same intense scrutiny he had used on the terrace. "I can make a phone call. Zoe, I know the best IP litigator on the East Coast. She eats provisional patents for breakfast." "Thank you," I said. "But," Graham interrupted, holding up a hand, "I need you to understand something. I am not going to rescue you." I blinked. "I am not asking for a rescue." "Good," Graham said, "because if I fix this for you, if I make the calls, pay the fees, and scare your parents into submission, you will always wonder if you could have done it yourself, and they will always believe they only lost because of my money." He stood up and walked over to me, towering in the way that felt protective rather than threatening. "I will give you the resources," he said. "I will give you the introduction. I will cover the retainer as a loan against your future grant money. But you have to lead the charge. You have to be the one who signs the affidavits. You have to be the one who destroys him in court. Can you do that?" I thought about Dylan's text. "I will make sure people see the real you." "Give me the number," I said. 2 hours later, I was sitting in a conference room that smelled of leather and intimidation. Across from me was Elena Vance, a forensic IP attorney who looked like she could dismantle a bomb with a fountain pen. She was reviewing the documents I had brought, my lab notebooks, the time-stamped server logs from Stonebridge, the email chains with my team dating back 3 years. "This is not a difficult case, Dr. Cooper," Vance said, tapping a red fingernail on the printout of Dylan's filing. "This is sloppy. He copied the diagrams directly from your published white paper. He did not even redraw them. He just cropped out the figure numbers." "He is not an engineer," I said. "He is a salesman. Clearly, she said. We can get this thrown out. We can file a motion to strike, prove prior art, and countersue for fraud. But to do that, we need to establish a pattern of behavior. We need to show that this is not an isolated incident of misunderstanding, but a calculated attempt to exploit you. She turned to her computer. I am going to run a standard asset and liability check on you, Dr. Cooper, just to make sure there are no other financial entanglements with your brother that they could use to claim this was a joint venture. Go ahead, I said. My finances are boring. Student loans and a car lease. Vance typed for a moment. Her face remained impassive, the blue light of the screen reflecting in her glasses. Then, she stopped typing. She frowned. Dr. Cooper, she said slowly, you said you have a car lease and student loans. Yes. Do you own a property in Newport? I laughed. I rent a one-bedroom apartment in Somerville. I definitely do not own property in Newport. Vance spun the monitor around. According to this credit report, you are the co-signer on a private commercial loan taken out 3 years ago. The principal amount is $250,000. It was secured against a commercial property in Newport. I stared at the screen. The numbers swam before my eyes. $250,000. That is impossible, I whispered. I never signed that. The loan was originated by a private lender, Vance said, reading the details. The primary borrower is Robert Cooper. The co-signer is Zoe Cooper. She clicked on a document icon. A PDF opened. It was a scanned copy of a loan agreement. I saw my father's signature, and right next to it, I saw mine. It was a good forgery, but it was a forgery. The loop on the Z was too wide. I did not sign this, I said, my voice shaking. What was this money for? Vance scrolled down to the purpose of loan section. Capital infusion for startup venture, DM Logistics, DM, Dylan Mercer. I felt the room spin. 3 years ago, that was when Dylan had founded his logistics company. That was when my parents had told me they were so proud of him for striking out on his own. That was when they had taken me out to dinner for my birthday, and my father had asked me to sign a stack of insurance forms for my car because he was switching carriers. I remembered that night. I remembered signing 5 or 6 papers without reading them because I trusted him, because he was my father. They had not just ignored me, they had not just hidden me, they had leveraged me, they had used my credit, my name, my clean financial history to secure $250,000 for Dylan to play CEO. They forged my signature, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Or they tricked me into signing it. They put me on the hook for $250,000. And if Dylan defaults, Vance said quietly, the lender comes after you. They garnish your wages. They seize your assets. They ruin your credit. She looked at me with sympathy. Dr. Cooper, this is not just civil fraud. This is identity theft. This is grand larceny. I sat back in the leather chair. I thought about the engagement party. I thought about my mother telling me not to embarrass them. They were not afraid I would embarrass them by being awkward. They were afraid I would embarrass them by being solvent. They needed me to be the invisible. Submissive daughter, because if I ever looked too closely at the books, I would see that they had been cannibalizing me to feed Dylan. The betrayal was not a sudden event. It was not a single toast. It was structural. It was the architecture of my entire adult life. Dr. Cooper, Vance asked, how do you want to proceed? I looked at the screen. I looked at the name, Robert Cooper, next to the fake Zoe Cooper. I remembered Graham's words. I supply the ammunition. You pull the trigger. I sat up straight. The shaking in my hands stopped. Audit everything, I said. Pull every record, verify every signature, and when you have it all compiled, I do not want to just file a motion. What do you want to do? Vance asked. I want to file charges, I said, against all of them. The engagement party had been the moment the curtain fell. But this was the moment I realized the stage was rotten. The script was rigged, and the only way to leave the theater was to burn it to the ground. The summons to the Harrow estate did not come with an engraved invitation this time. It came via a conference call request from Graham's personal secretary. Scheduled for 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. The location was the library of the main house. The agenda was simply titled Resolution. When I walked into the room, the atmosphere was so brittle I felt like a cough could shatter the windows. The library was a cavernous space filled with first editions and the smell of old leather, but today it felt like a courtroom. Graham sat behind his massive oak desk, his face carved from granite. Lila stood by the fireplace, her arms crossed tight against her chest, looking at the floor. My parents and Dylan were already seated on the plush velvet sofas. My mother was trying to project an air of offended dignity, smoothing her skirt with jerky, nervous movements. My father looked like he was waiting for a biopsy result, and Dylan looked like a man who was trying to calculate the odds of surviving a jump from the window. "Thank you for coming, Zoe," Graham said. He did not ask me to sit. He simply nodded at me, acknowledging my presence as a witness, or perhaps a prosecutor. "Let's get straight to the point," Graham continued, his voice devoid of warmth. He picked up a file folder from his desk. "Lila has some questions." Lila turned from the fireplace. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her jaw was set. She walked over to the coffee table in the center of the room and dropped a document onto the polished wood. It was the patent filing I had unearthed with my forensic attorney. "Dylan," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried, "I want you to explain why your name is listed as the primary inventor on a biomedical device that Zoe spent 4 years developing." Dylan looked at the document, then at me, then back at Lila. He let out a laugh that sounded like air escaping a tire. "This," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "Babe, it is administrative. You know how startups work. We were protecting the IP for the family. Zoe is busy with the science side. She does not understand the legal framework. I filed it to keep it safe so some big pharma company did not swoop in and steal it. I was doing her a favor." "A favor," Lila repeated flatly. "By listing yourself as the inventor, by omitting her name from the primary claim." "It is a placeholder," Dylan insisted, leaning forward, his charm operating at max capacity. "We were going to amend it later. Right, Mom? We talked about this. We were going to set up a family trust." My mother jumped in, eager to follow the script. "Exactly. We were just trying to help Zoe. She is so scattered with paperwork. We wanted to make sure the asset was secure for everyone." "The asset," Graham said. He did not raise his voice. "You mean Zoe's intellectual property, which you attempted to secure in Dylan's name, using a lawyer Dylan retained 2 weeks after he met my daughter." Dylan flinched. "That is a coincidence. Look, Graham, with all due respect, this is a misunderstanding. Zoe is confused. She's been under a lot of stress lately. The grant review, the pressure. I think she is lashing out because she is jealous." He turned to me, his eyes pleading and hateful all at once. "Zoe, tell them," he said. "Tell them you are just jealous of the engagement. Tell them you are trying to blow this up because you cannot stand that I am happy." I looked at him. I looked at the brother who had stolen my work, my credit, and my parents' love. "I am not jealous, Dylan," I said calmly. "I am litigious, and I have a forensic audit that says you never contributed a single line of code or a single schematic to that project. You cannot even pronounce the name of the polymer we use." "It is a composite," Dylan stammered. "It is a non-Newtonian fluid suspension," I corrected. "And you just proved my point." Graham leaned forward. "Here is the reality. Dylan, if you want to marry into this family, the era of smoke and mirrors ends today. I am demanding full transparency. If there is to be a wedding, there will be a prenuptial agreement that creates a complete firewall between your finances and Lila's inheritance. And there will be an independent verification of every asset you claim to own, including this patent." Dylan went pale. I saw the panic rise in his eyes. It was not the panic of a man losing the woman he loved. It was the panic of a parasite losing its host. He looked at the opulent room, the ocean view, the security that the Harrow name provided, and he saw it all slipping away. "We do not need to do that," Dylan said, his voice rising in pitch. "Graham, come on. We are going to be family. You do not treat family like suspects." "I treat liabilities like suspects," Graham said. Dylan stood up abruptly. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the rug. Then he stopped and looked at me. "Zoe," he said, "can I talk to you privately just for a second? Please, sister to brother." I looked at Graham. He gave a microscopic nod. "5 minutes?" Graham said. Dylan grabbed my arm, gentle enough to look affectionate, hard enough to bruise, and pulled me out into the hallway. He marched me down to the sunroom, checking to make sure the doors were closed. As soon as we were alone, the mask fell off completely. "You have to fix this," he hissed, backing me against a table. "You have to go back in there and tell them you gave me permission to file that patent. You have to tell them I was acting as your agent." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was already typed up. "Sign this," he said, shoving it at me. "It is a statement of intent. It says we had a verbal agreement. If you sign this, the audit goes away. The fraud charges go away. I can explain the rest to Graham." I looked at the paper. I, Zoe Cooper, acknowledged that Dylan Mercer acted with my full knowledge and consent. "I am not signing that," I said. "You have to," Dylan shouted, his face twisting. "Do you have any idea what you are doing? You are ruining me. I have debts, Zoe, real debts. If this merger with the Harrow family does not happen, I am dead in the water. I need this." "You called it a merger," I said softly. "You are marrying a person, Dylan, not a corporation." "It is the same thing," he snapped. "Grow up, Zoe. This is how the world works. You leverage what you have. And I had your little science project. And I had the Harrow connection, and I was going to make it work for all of us. Mom and Dad needed this too. Do you know how much money they sank into my logistics company? They are tapped out." "Because you stole it," I said. "You and Dad forged my signature on a loan." "We did what we had to do," Dylan screamed. "Because you were useless. You were off playing in your lab, making $50,000 a year. While we were trying to build a legacy. Your success. God, your success is embarrassing." I stared at him. "My success is embarrassing." "Yes," he yelled, finally saying the thing that had been festering for years. "It makes the family look weird. It makes us look small. You with your PhD, and your grants, and your saving the world nonsense. It makes Dad look like a failure because he cannot even run a trucking company. It makes me look like a joke. We had to control you because if we let you shine, everyone would see that we are just ordinary. You make us look like frauds by comparison." The silence that followed was ringing. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. He had finally admitted it. They did not hide me because I was shameful. They hid me because I was real. And my reality exposed their fiction. "Wow," I said. "That is actually the most honest thing you have ever said." "Just sign the paper," Dylan said, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "Or I swear to God, Zoe, I will bury you. I will tell everyone you are unstable. I will tell them you—" The door to the sunroom clicked open. Dylan spun around. Lila was standing there. She was holding the door handle, her knuckles white. Graham was standing behind her, and my parents were behind him. Lila looked at Dylan. Her face was not angry. It was absolutely devastated. "Lila," Dylan said, his voice jumping up 2 octaves into a panic. "Babe, we were just hashing out a sibling thing. Intense. You know." "I heard you," Lila said. Her voice was trembling. "I heard you say it was a merger. I heard you say you needed this." No. That was just, I was emotional." Dylan stepped toward her, reaching out. "Lila, please." Lila stepped back. She put a hand up, a physical barrier between them. "You do not love me," she said. It was a statement of fact. "You love the access. You love the doors I open. You love the safety net. That is not true, Dylan cried, tears actually forming in his eyes now, tears of frustration, not sorrow. I love you, I want to build a life with you. You want to build a legacy, Lila said. And you want to use my father's money and your sister's brain to do it. You are just a middleman. Dylan, you are a broker of other people's value. Graham stepped into the room. He was holding a tablet. There is one more thing, Graham said. He looked at my parents. My legal team just received a file from Dr. Cooper's forensic attorney. It concerns the provisional patent filing. My mother froze. We did not know anything about that. That was all Dylan. Really? Graham swiped a finger across the tablet. Because we have subpoenaed phone records from the attorney who filed it. There are 12 conference calls logged between Dylan's number, the attorney's office, and the Cooper family landline, including one call that lasted 40 minutes on the day the filing was submitted. He turned the screen around. It showed the call log. This was not a rogue act by a desperate son, Graham said. This was a family project. You all sat down, discussed how to strip Zoe of her rights, and executed it together. You coordinated the theft. My father collapsed onto a wicker chair, burying his face in his hands. My mother looked at the screen, and for the first time, I saw the fight leave her. She looked trapped. Lila looked at Dylan one last time. She took a deep breath, and she slowly pulled the engagement ring off her finger. It was a large, flawless diamond that my parents had undoubtedly pressured Dylan to buy on credit. She placed the ring on the table next to the statement Dylan had tried to make me sign. We need time, Lila said. Lila, please, Dylan begged, falling to his knees. It was pathetic. It was a performance of grief. But the audience had already left the theater. Do not do this. We can fix this. I will drop the patent. I will do the prenup. Anything. It is not about the prenup, Lila said, her voice breaking. It is about the fact that I do not know who you are, and I do not think I want to know any more. She turned to Graham. I would like to go to my room. Dad. Go ahead, sweetheart, Graham said gently. Lila walked out. She did not look back. The silence in the sunroom was heavy and suffocating. Dylan was kneeling on the floor, staring at the ring. My parents were standing like statues in the corner. Then, my mother's shock turned into the only emotion she knew how to process blame. She turned to me. Her eyes were wild, filled with a venom that had been distilling for 20 years. Are you happy? She screamed. Look at what you did. You destroyed everything, you selfish, ungrateful little brat. We were this close. We were finally going to be safe, and you burned it all down because you could not just stay in your corner. Eleanor, Graham warned, stepping forward. But I did not need Graham to defend me, not anymore. I looked at my mother. I looked at the woman who had told me not to embarrass her. I looked at the father who had forged my name. I looked at the brother who had tried to erase me. I did not destroy anything, I said. My voice was calm, steady, and clear. I just stopped hiding the evidence. I walked past them. I walked past the ring on the table. I walked out of the sunroom and back toward the library. I had a deposition to prepare for. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what the record would show. The investigation into my professional conduct lasted exactly 14 days. It ended not with a bang, but with a 3-page PDF attached to an email from the university provost, CC'd to the entire board of directors at Stonebridge Biodesign. My parents and Dylan had hoped the anonymous complaint would trigger a scandal, a cloud of suspicion that would make me radioactive to donors and dangerous to employ. They had banked on the idea that in the world of high-stakes research, the mere accusation of misuse of funds was enough to kill a career. They were operating on the logic of gossip, where smoke always implies fire. But they had forgotten that I did not work in gossip. I worked in data. The audit report was, in the words of Eris Thorne, a love letter to bureaucratic obsessive compulsion. The forensic accountants had gone back 5 years. They found that not only had I not misused a single cent of the innovator's seed grant, But I had also personally subsidized the lab's coffee supply and paid for 3 rounds of intern stipends out of my own pocket when the budget was tight. The report concluded that my financial management was exemplary and unusually transparent. The university did not just reinstate my access, they issued a formal apology. My integrity, once a quiet personal code, was now a matter of public record, documented in bold Arial font, with the grant review dead in the water. The battle shifted to the patent. This was the part I had dreaded. I expected a long, drawn-out fight. I expected Dylan to drag it out, to lie on the stand, to force me to testify against my own brother in open court. I was ready for it, but I was not looking forward to the bloodletting. It turned out, parasites do not fight when you expose them to direct sunlight. They just wither. My forensic IP attorney, Elena Vance, requested a summary judgment meeting with Dylan's legal team. She brought one thing a timeline. We had overlaid the timestamps of my original CAD files created 3 years ago with the creation dates on Dylan's provisional filing. It was humiliatingly simple. Dylan had not even bothered to rename the layer files in the design software. The metadata on his submission showed that the files had been copied from a shared family cloud drive, which I had foolishly used to back up my thesis data years ago, and pasted into a new document 2 weeks after he met Lila. Elena put it bluntly to Dylan's lawyer. Your client did not invent a variable load suspension system. He invented a save-as command. We are prepared to file for sanctions against your firm for knowingly submitting a fraudulent claim. Dylan's lawyer, a man who clearly realized he was not getting paid enough for this level of exposure, withdrew the patent application the next morning. There was no settlement. There was no negotiation. There was just a total, unconditional surrender. Dylan had tried to repackage his proximity to me into ownership of me, and he had failed. The morning the patent challenge was officially dropped, Graham Harrow called me. "It is done," he asked. "It is done," I said. I was standing on the balcony of my small apartment, looking at the parking lot, but feeling like I was standing on a mountain peak. "Good," Graham said. "Now we build." He invited me to his office. But this time, there were no schematics for wind turbines on the whiteboard. There was just a single sentence written in blue marker, the objective scale. Graham did not offer me a job. He offered me a kingdom. "I have been looking at the numbers," Graham said, pouring us both sparkling water. "Your lab at Stonebridge is doing miracles, Zoe, but you are bottlenecked by grant cycles. You spend 40% of your time begging for money and 60% doing the science. I want to flip that ratio." He slid a binder across the desk. "I am proposing a new structure," he said. "A standalone philanthropic foundation, fully endowed, 5 years of guaranteed operating capital. We pull you out of the Stonebridge ecosystem amicably. We will fund them too as a partner, and we set you up with your own facility. You run the science. I handle the back end. No profit motive, no corporate shareholders demanding quarterly returns. Just the mission." I opened the binder. The numbers were staggering. $10 million in initial seed funding, a dedicated fabrication facility, legal support. It was everything I had ever wanted. It was the dream. But the Zoe Cooper who sat in that chair was not the same Zoe Cooper who had walked into the engagement party 2 weeks ago. That Zoe would have said yes immediately. Grateful for the crumbs, the new Zoe knew that even gifts came with strings. I closed the binder. "I have conditions," I said. Graham smiled. It was a shark smile, but one of approval. "I would be worried if you did not." "I want a firewall," I said. "Complete separation between the Foundation's IP and Harrow Industries. I do not want your corporate arm borrowing my tech for high-end medical devices 2 years down the road. The patent stays open source for developing nations, protected by a Creative Commons license that prevents exclusive commercialization." "Agreed," Graham said without hesitation. "I want governance," I continued. "The board cannot just be you and your friends. I want 50% of the seats reserved for engineers and clinicians. People who actually know what a prosthetic leg feels like, not just what it costs." "Done," Graham said. "And," I said, taking a deep breath. I want transparency. Every dollar in and out is published. If we are going to do this, we are going to be the anti-Dylan. No smoke, no mirrors. Graham leaned back in his chair. You drive a hard bargain. Doctor, Cooper, but those are terms I can live with. In fact, they are terms I prefer. He picked up a pen and tapped the cover of the binder. There is one condition I have, however, he said. I tensed. What is it? The name, Graham said. I took the liberty of drafting the incorporation papers. I called it the Harrow Cooper Pediatric Mobility Initiative. I stared at him. Harrow Cooper? My name? Next to his? Not hidden in a footnote, not buried in an acknowledgement section, right there on the letterhead. You do not have to do that, I said. The Harrow name opens doors. My name just confuses people. Your name is the asset, Graham corrected me firmly. You are the scientist. You are the credibility. And frankly, Zoe, after the way your parents tried to erase you, I think it is high time we carved your name into the granite. I felt a lump in my throat. Okay, I whispered. Harrow Cooper? Excellent, Graham said. We launch in a month. The news of the foundation hit the press wire 3 days later. It was a business story, but because of the Harrow connection, it bled into the social columns. Billionaire backs bride's sister in 8-figure philanthropic venture, and just like that, the rats came scurrying back to the ship they had abandoned. My parents requested a meeting. They did not ask to come to my apartment. They asked to meet at the temporary office space Graham had rented for the foundation launch. They wanted to meet me on my new turf, hoping the smell of fresh paint and money would make me forget the smell of their betrayal. I agreed to see them. Not because I wanted to reconcile, but because I needed to close the door. They arrived looking impeccable, as always. My mother wore a suit that probably cost more than my first grant. My father wore his serious businessman tie. They walked in with smiles that were bright, brittle, and terrifyingly familiar. They were carrying a potted orchid. Zoe, my mother cried, stepping forward with her arms open. Oh, darling, we saw the news. It is absolutely incredible. The Harrow Cooper Initiative. Can you imagine? She tried to hug me. I did not step back. But I did not hug her back. I stood there like a statue until she pulled away, her smile faltering slightly. We are just so proud, my father added, looking around the office. $10 million. That is serious capital. Zoe, you are going to need help managing that. You know, I have a lot of experience with logistics. Stop, I said. The word was not loud, but it cut the air like a whip. Please, I said. Do not insult my intelligence by pretending you are here to help. You are here because the script flipped. You are here because I am no longer the liability. I am the ticket. Zoe, that is not fair, my mother said, her eyes welling with practiced tears. We are your family. We made mistakes. Yes, the party was stressful. Dylan was under so much pressure. We were just trying to keep the peace. You were not keeping the peace, I said. You were keeping up appearances, and you were willing to sell me for parts to do it. I walked over to my desk, and picked up a folder. Here is how this works, I said. I am not going to ban you from my life. That would require energy I do not want to waste on you. But the terms have changed. I looked at them both. You can attend the public launch next month, I said. You can come to the galas. You can eat the canapés, but you will attend as guests. You will sit in the seats assigned to the general audience. You will not be on the stage. You will not be on the board. And you will never, ever speak to the press on my behalf. My mother looked horrified. But we are your parents. People will expect us to be involved. It will look strange if we are just sitting there. It will look honest, I said. You spent 20 years telling me to sit in the back. Now you can see what the view looks like from there. My mother opened her mouth to argue. But my father put a hand on her arm. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't fear or calculation. It was defeat. Eleanor, he said softly, Let it go. My mother stiffened, then turned and walked out of the office without another word. She left the orchid on the reception desk. It looked lonely. My father lingered. He stood by the door, twisting his hat in his hands. "Zoe," he said. "Yes, Dad. He struggled with the words. "I wanted to say back when you were in grad school, when you were struggling with that first prototype, I told your mother we should help you. I wanted to co-sign that first apartment lease for you." I looked at him. "But you didn't." "No," he admitted. "She said it would make you soft. She said we needed to save the credit for Dylan's ventures. She keeps a score. Zoe, your mother, she has a ledger in her head, and once you are in the red, she never lets you get back in the black." He looked at me with a sad, pleading expression. "I just wanted you to know. I tried. I just could not fight her on it. It is easier to just go along with her. It keeps the peace." I looked at this man who had forged my signature to save himself from an argument, this man who had watched me be humiliated for decades because he was too afraid to tell his wife to stop. "Dad," I said gently, "you think Mom is the villain of this story, and she is difficult, but do you want to know the truth?" He blinked. "What?" "She was mean," I said. "But you were a coward, and honestly, the cowardice did more damage, because you knew it was wrong, and you did it anyway. You did not keep the peace. Dad, you just made sure the war was only fought against me." He flinched. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing to say. The truth, stripped of all the family mythology, was just a cold, hard fact on the table. "Goodbye, Dad," I said. "I have work to do." He nodded slowly, put on his hat, and walked out. I stood alone in the quiet office. I looked at the orchid. I looked at the name on the door, Harrow Cooper. I realized then that my anger had finally evaporated. It wasn't replaced by forgiveness. Some things you cannot forgive, but by a profound sense of clarity. My parents were not monsters under the bed. They were just small, frightened people who had built a cage of expectations and locked themselves inside it. I was the only one who had walked out. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and began to draft the charter for the foundation. I had 100 emails to answer. I had engineers to hire. I had a world to change. And for the first time, I did not have to ask anyone for permission to start. It has been exactly 365 days since I walked up the driveway of the Harrow estate in a dress I bought on clearance, terrified that the gravel crunching under my heels was too loud. Tonight, the gravel is the same. The salt air off the Atlantic Ocean smells exactly the same. The string quartet is even playing the same Vivaldi concerto they played the night my brother got engaged. But everything else has changed. I did not arrive in a rented sedan this time. I drove my own car, a sensible but very sleek electric model that I bought with my own salary. I did not walk toward the side entrance, the one reserved for vendors and embarrassing relatives. I walked straight to the double mahogany doors at the front of the house. The valet did not look through me. He stepped forward, opened my door, and smiled. "Good evening, Dr. Cooper," he said. "Welcome back." "Thank you," I said. And for the first time in my life, I did not feel the need to apologize for being there. The estate had been transformed. The terrace where I had once hidden behind a pillar was now the focal point of the evening. It was draped in silk banners, deep indigo and silver, bearing the logo of the Harrow Cooper Pediatric Mobility Initiative. Tables were set not for a wedding, but for a celebration of science and charity. I walked into the main hall. The noise of the crowd was a dull roar, the sound of 300 wealthy people discussing tax-deductible donations. But as soon as I stepped into the light of the chandelier, the noise shifted. It didn't stop, that would be dramatic, but it changed frequency. Heads turned. People nudged each other. I saw Evelyn Klein near the bar. She raised her martini glass to me, a silent callback to the night she found me in the shadows. I smiled back. I scanned the room for my parents. I found them. They were sitting in row 4, not the front row, not the VIP tables, They were in the general seating area, the seats reserved for friends of the foundation. My mother was wearing a gold dress that was trying too hard. My father was looking at his program with intense fascination, likely trying to avoid making eye contact with anyone who knew the truth about the loan he had forged. They saw me. My mother sat up straighter. She put on that familiar, bright smile, the one she used to wear when she was pretending we were a perfect family. She gave me a little wave, a gesture that said, "See, we are here. We are supporting you. We are part of this." I did not wave back. I just nodded. Once, and kept walking toward the stage. Graham Harrow was already at the podium. He looked older than he had a year ago, but stronger. The last year had been hard on his family, the engagement ending, the public fallout, the restructuring of his trust, but he wore the weathering well. "Ladies and gentlemen," Graham said, his voice booming over the speakers without effort. "Thank you for coming." The room quieted. "A year ago," Graham continued, "we stood on this terrace to celebrate a union. That union did not come to pass. But something else was born that night, something far more important." He looked down at me, standing in the wings. "We live in a world that is obsessed with image," Graham said. "We curate our lives. We filter our photos. We present the best version of ourselves, even if it is a lie. But science does not care about your image. Science only cares about the truth. And the truth is, there are children in this world who cannot walk because they were born in the wrong zip code." He paused. "Tonight, we are launching the first global initiative dedicated to fixing that problem, and we are doing it because one woman refused to stop working. Even when she was told her work did not matter." He stepped aside and gestured to the microphone. "Please welcome the director of the foundation," Graham said. "My partner, Dr. Zoe Cooper." The applause was not polite. It was thunderous. It washed over me like a physical wave. I walked up the stairs, my heels clicking on the wood. I stood behind the podium. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw the venture capitalists who had once ignored me. I saw the socialites who had looked through me. And I saw my parents, clapping enthusiastically, looking around to make sure everyone saw them clapping. I took a deep breath. "Thank you," I said. My voice was steady. "Thank you to Graham for believing that a prosthetic knee was more interesting than a hedge fund. Thank you to my team, who are currently in the lab while we eat canapés, because they know the work does not stop for a party." I gripped the sides of the podium. "For a long time," I said, "I thought that impact was something you had to ask permission for. I thought you had to wait for someone to hand you a microphone. I thought you had to look a certain way, or marry a certain person, to be worthy of being heard." I looked directly at row 4. "I was taught that my work was boring," I said. "I was taught that it was grotesque. I was taught that the best thing I could do for the people I loved was to stay invisible." My mother's smile faltered. She shifted in her seat. "But invisibility is a luxury we cannot afford," I continued. "The children we serve are invisible to the healthcare systems in their countries. They are invisible to the insurance companies. If we stay quiet, they stay broken. So I am done being quiet." I turned the page of my speech. It was time for the business. "As part of our launch tonight," I said, "I am pleased to announce a significant contribution to the Foundation's endowment. As many of you know, there was a legal dispute regarding the intellectual property of the variable load suspension system." A ripple of whispers went through the crowd. Everyone knew the rumors about Dylan. "That dispute has been resolved," I said. "The patent challenge has been withdrawn with prejudice, and as part of the resolution, full restitution has been made for the unauthorized use of research data. That restitution, totaling $250,000, has been donated anonymously to the Foundation." I did not say Dylan's name. I did not have to. The number $250,000 was the exact amount of the loan my father had forged in my name. We had forced them to liquidate Dylan's logistics company assets to pay it back, and then we had funneled it right into the charity. It was poetic justice. Dylan's greed was now funding 3 clinics in Cambodia. "We are also expanding our board," I said. I would like to welcome our newest Director of Educational Outreach. I gestured to the side of the stage. Lila Harrow walked out. She looked stunning, but not in a bridal way. She was wearing a sharp black suit. Her hair was cut in a sleek, modern bob. She looked like a woman who ran things. The crowd gasped. To see the ex-fiancée standing next to the sister of the man she almost married was a tableau nobody expected. Lila took the microphone I offered her. "Thank you, Zoe," she said. Her voice was strong. "I learned a hard lesson this year. I learned that you cannot build a future on a foundation of secrets. I am proud to stand here with a woman who values truth over spectacle, and I am proud to help the next generation of engineers find their voice." She smiled at me. It was a real smile, born of coffee shops and shared trauma and the hard work of rebuilding. She handed the mic back to me and stepped back, standing as my ally, not my prop. I looked out at the audience one last time. My mother was beaming. She was leaning over to the woman next to her, I think it was the mayor's wife, and whispering something. I knew exactly what she was saying. She was saying, "That is my daughter. We are so proud. We always knew she would do great things." She caught my eye. She nodded at me, a look of conspiratorial pride, as if we were in this together, as if she hadn't spent 20 years trying to edit me out of the picture. I stopped. I went off script. "One last thing," I said. The room went silent. I looked directly at Eleanor Cooper. I locked eyes with her. I let the silence stretch until she stopped whispering, until her smile froze, until she realized that I was not playing the game anymore. "I see my parents are here tonight," I said. My mother started to stand up, ready to wave, ready to accept the applause she felt she was owed. "Please sit down," I said. It was a command, soft, but absolute. My mother froze, halfway out of her chair. She sank back down, her face draining of color. "I want to be very clear," I said, my voice ringing in the cool night air. "Success has a way of rewriting history. When you make it to the stage, people suddenly remember how much they supported you all along. They remember the encouragement they never gave. They remember the pride they never felt." I leaned into the microphone. "But the truth has a memory," I said. "You do not get to hide me in the dark for 20 years and then claim me when I'm standing in the light." The words landed like stones. "You do not get to hide me, then claim me." My mother flinched as if I had struck her. My father looked down at his lap, shrinking into himself. The people around them shifted away, creating a small, physical distance, as if the shame was contagious. I did not look away. I held her gaze. I wanted her to know that I saw her. I saw the transaction she was trying to make, trading my forgiveness for her social status, and I was rejecting the deal. "They once told me not to embarrass them," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that the microphone caught and amplified to the back of the terrace. "They told me to sit in the corner, but looking out at all of you tonight, looking at the work we're about to do, I realized something." I smiled. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated freedom. "The only embarrassing thing," I said, "was pretending I belonged in the corner." I stepped back from the podium. For a second, there was silence, and then the applause started. It was not the polite, golf clap applause of the year before. It was a roar. It was a standing ovation. People were on their feet. Graham was clapping. Lila was clapping. The engineers, the donors, the servers, they were all clapping. But they were not clapping for revenge. Revenge is cheap. Revenge is messy. They were clapping for clarity. They were clapping because for one moment, the curtain had been pulled back, and the truth was the only thing left standing on the stage. I did not look at my parents again. I did not need to. They were just guests now. I turned to Graham and Lila. We stood together in the light. 3 people who had chosen the hard road over the easy lie. I walked off the stage, and I did not walk toward the shadows. I walked right down the center aisle, head high, breathing the ocean air, knowing that I would never, ever be invisible again. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from your car, your kitchen, or maybe your own corner office? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you enjoyed Zoe's journey from the shadows to the spotlight, please make sure to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and smash that hype button so we can get this story out to more people who need to hear it. See you in the next one.